Say bonjour to Paris with unmissable hotel and hostel deals from up to 3 nights, starting at just $210. And add the Paris Pass for $125, which includes free entry to over 60 attractions, unlimited metro travel, hop-on, hop-off bus ticket, and a wine tasting experience. No, I haven't just become an affiliate to a travel website, and I might not be able to pull that one off after today's episode. What I read you was a real quote from a real website, a bargain travel website here in the UK, and I just converted the prices into dollars. And the reason why I did that was to ask your opinion. What do you think about this deal? Would you take it? So it's $210 for 3 nights of accommodation. It doesn't include transport, but heck, it's Paris. It's not that expensive, right? Well, it depends on your perspective. For me, this $210 is almost exactly the budget of my 45-day trip from Romania, which is Eastern Europe, all the way to Paris, not including the flight back home. How did I do it? That's today's story. Hello and welcome to Valiant Growth, the podcast that empowers you to earn self-esteem, build amazing relationships, and achieve freedom through radical personal development. I am your host, Philip Frey, and today I present you my experiences with under $40 a week travel in Western Europe. Today's episode will be a little bit more of a story time, but it is a real story and I believe it might empower you to drastically cut your travel expenses. So the story begins almost exactly 3 years ago, and the setting of the story is in a very small room, a very dark room, a room that was half underground, and this was the room that I shared with a friend as a student, and it was summer, so we had the coolest room in this student house, and we were planning to launch our business at the time, and we had just spent most of the day working on that, but we decided to take a break, and we both lay down on our beds. Other than our chairs, there wasn't that much else to recline on in the room, and we started talking about how could we travel very inexpensively. We didn't have a lot of money at the time. Neither of us were employed. Our monthly budget was something around $200, which in Romania goes a little bit further, but it still wasn't much. But my friend wanted to travel. He was the kind of guy who wasn't deterred by such petty things as money. And I was a bit more of a worrier, but with an O, not an A. But I said, hey, I mean, it's a thought experiment. Let's have our way with it. So he brought up the topic and he brainstormed a little bit on how we could travel really cheaply. And we even got to how could we make some money on the road. And we had all sorts of ideas, like we could make pictures, we could take pictures for people, kind of old school style, sell the retro charm. We could do this and that, we could sell things, we could ask people for change at vending machines and then use the money to buy food. We went everywhere, we were just exploring ideas. That was cool and we did it for an hour, but then we got back to planning our business. That was the priority, this was more of a game. We created our business plan but couldn't find funding, and we had heard of this youth event in Slovakia, and we had signed up. We enjoyed traveling, and we've been to a few places together before. We enjoyed each other's company, so we said, hey, let's check this out. And we put the whole business thing on hold. And Slovakia is very close to Romania. You might want to follow the story on a map, actually, but this is Slovakia would be Central/Eastern Europe. And we got there through Hungary, and we had fun for a week there, but then it was time to go home. But one day in that week we said, hey, we're already here. Might as well check out the capital, Bratislava, because we were in a different part of the country. And while looking at the map, while we're there, might as well check out Vienna, because it's so close, the capital of Austria. Oh, and we could combine the whole thing and visit some friends in Hungary, and then we can get back home. I had just dropped out of university. He had just finished it. I was 20, he was 22. We had some time, so we said, hey, why not? We didn't have a lot of money on hand, but we had some meager reserves, just enough to make this trip more or less realistic. And there's a steep discount on Hungarian train travel for us, so we said, hey, let's give it a shot. So we got back to Hungary, we got on a train, we visited our friends, we got to the border of Austria and Hungary, to a city called Sopron, but we were really running out of money. So we said, it's time for hitchhiking. And we never visited Bratislava, by the way. We dropped that goal, but we did want to go to Vienna, which is a very nice city. So he had more experience with hitchhiking. I wasn't a big fan of it, to be honest. Just the idea of standing on the road with a sign, not my thing at the time. But what else were we going to do? So I said, hey, we're young, let's take this adventure, let's try it. So we crossed the border on foot. I insisted on it. For me, it was kind of a symbolic event of crossing into Western Europe for the first time on foot. That was something special for me. But after that, we decided to try hitchhiking to Vienna. And we did have a stack of A4 papers because we had hitchhiked one little bit of our journey. It's kind of a travel hack between Romania and Hungary that under certain conditions it's a good thing to cross the border by hitchhiking. You can usually do it for free or for a very small contribution, and it saves you a lot of money on the train. So we had this stack of papers, we had a marker, so we just wrote Vienna on a sheet of paper and we held that out. I think it was my friend. I was more shy and reluctant at the time, and he was better looking too, so there you go. So he held that paper out and we got a car to stop, and they didn't take us very far. We were kind of in the middle of nowhere in a forest, and they took us to probably the next village. That's as far as they were going, the first village of Austria. Oh, and this whole thing was happening in the middle of the night. Probably not a lot of people think of hitchhiking that time, but it was the situation that we were in. So we said, hey, gotta get moving. So they dropped us off at probably a little bit after midnight next to the train station of this very small Austrian village. And, well, they were making the assumption that we would take the train, but we knew that we could not afford it. At that point, our purchasing power had diminished to nothing, not to mention our reserves, which were very small. Probably a couple of dollars worth of money was in our pockets. But we told them that we would take the train just to not to seem very weird. So we ended up at this train station, and it was a very small train station, very clean train station. You could see that. You could see the Austrian influence there. And there was no hostel in this little village. Little villages sometimes have some accommodation, but it's always more expensive than big cities. And, well, we didn't have any money anyway, so we said, gotta we have to stay somewhere. So the train station was open. So we said, hey, let's go in here. Let's try to sleep a little bit on the benches. There was nobody there. It was well lit. It was clean. And we can get out. And actually the train master came in, and we looked like travelers. We had backpacks, things like that. So he said, hey, waiting for the morning train? And we said, ja, natürlich, which means of course. But he probably asked us in English, to be fair. So we said, yeah, we're waiting for the morning train. And I don't think he even considered the fact that we might be doing anything else. Big city train stations and personnel, they're much more jaded to homeless / traveling people. But this little village, well, they probably don't get this kind of people. So they just said, hey, these guys are waiting for the morning train, so we're not going to disturb them. Because, to be fair, housing homeless people is not the main function of train stations. So we stood silent of our real intentions. So we slept there, and it wasn't the most comfortable thing in the world, but it was okay. And just a little bit before the first train came into the station, we quietly snuck out and got on our way. It was still dark, and we were once again trying to catch another ride. And I'm not going to tell the whole story here because I remember it all very, very vividly. Of course, it was such an adventure. But in this short period of time, we learned that A, hitchhiking is viable, if rough a little at times, and B, you can find some accommodation even if you're not that well off. So as you might have guessed, we got to Vienna, we saw the city, but then we said, hey, what if we kept going? What if we went just a little bit more? I mean, we don't have anything to do. We kind of ran out of money, but we have some money. We have a credit card, a debit card more precisely. We'll get some funding from home. Maybe we can keep going like this for a little bit more. Maybe we could see some friends in the Czech Republic. Maybe we could see Prague, which we never saw, and which something is that I regret. But we said, hey, let's keep moving. And once we were in the Czech Republic, we said, hey, maybe we could get to Germany as well. I mean, why not? And our plans were getting bolder and bolder and bolder. And by the end of it, our plans were extraordinary. We were thinking about, okay, we get to Paris, then London, then southern France, then Italy, who knows, and we'll loop back through southern Europe to Romania. So gradually, the plans became a little bit extraordinary and perhaps unrealistic, if for no other reason, because this kind of travel wears you out. And after we hit a string of extreme cold, no housing, just bad things happening in general in the Netherlands and then Belgium, we just booked the flight back home. We got to Paris and then got back home. But the trip was a 45-day trip, and we spent around $35 per week. And a little detail that I didn't tell you was that we were doing this in October to November, and a lot of our traveling was very near the coast, the northern coast of Europe, in Germany, Netherlands, Belgium. Hint, this is not the best combination of time and place, and it was getting pretty extreme. There was a lot of wind, a lot of cold, soul-piercing wind going on there, not to mention the rain. So that cut our trip a little bit short, together with the coming of the winter. But had we started in the summer, we probably would have kept going further. But even with this was the adventure that defined that year. Maybe that decade of our lives. I mean, there's still a lot of time left in the future, but it was an unbelievable experience. I think we visited 10 countries total, and most of it was done through hitchhiking. And I'll get into the details a little bit further, but I'll just say it was an incredible experience that really enriched us, and it's also one of the main reasons why I am in the United Kingdom right now. It showed us that we can succeed in foreign environments. It showed us how creative we can get given unusual situations. To refer back to the last episode, we are smarter than we think. It was also a kind of stoic experience where we lived in some really rough conditions, but we saw that it is doable. We lived with sometimes no money in our pocket, nothing to eat, nowhere to sleep other than on the street, charging our tablets and phones, well, one tablet and phone in McDonald's, things like that. So we got a good homeless person experience out of that. But it really, I can only speak personally here, but it really raised my resilience, and it showed me that worst case scenario, this is where I will get, and this life, it's not fun, it's not comfortable, but I can do it. If everything fails, I know how to sleep on the street. I know how to get food when I have no money. I know how to get travel when I have no money. So that's as far as I can fall, not considering medical conditions. So it enabled me to take a lot more risk than before, and that was a very, very rich reward, other than all the experiences, all the stories, all the enrichment that we had. That was probably the biggest benefit. So let me go into specifics here and tell you how you can do this with less hassle and less extreme conditions, because all of our difficulties came from the fact that we were completely inexperienced. They were more mistakes than something that comes normally, naturally, something that is a component of this kind of lifestyle. And yeah, let me say that we didn't have a lot of experience. I didn't say this before, but it was a very new thing for us, and I don't think either of us have even heard of someone doing this to the extent that we did. And on the road we found people who were even more extreme, but we started out with very, very little knowledge and just improvising on the spot, and we got from Romania to Paris on under 35 or around $35 a week. And if I did this trip now, and I can't do it for a number of reasons, but were I to do it now, or when I do it in the future, it might cost even less and be a lot more smooth and comfortable because I have the experience. So yeah, if you're a family man, perhaps this is something that's not realistic to you, or if you are locked into a job. But if you have some free time, or if you can make some free time for yourself, if you have little commitments, or even if you have friends who are in situations like this, and you can send them this podcast and say, "Hey man, I can't do this, but you're kind of an extreme guy. You do things that are out of the ordinary. Where check this out. Maybe you could travel the world. Maybe you could travel the world on nothing doing this." So that's the value that I aim to bring to you here. So let me get to the specifics here, and I will go through the major sources of expenses that people have when they travel. So number one is, of course, the traveling itself. And if you have a flight, you have to take a flight to the destination. So for instance, if you want to do this in Europe like we did, but you live in the US, I can't give you any advice on how you can avoid that. or how you can reduce that, though I know that there are people out there who do all sorts of travel hacks. But other than that, once you're on the ground, in most Western European countries, you have free transport through hitchhiking. It's unreliable, it's a little bit risky, though, to be fair, we talked to a number of people who did this for a lifestyle, and they hadn't really experienced or heard really bad cases, but there is an element of risk involved. But if you can accept that, if you can take that, and I say it's pretty safe. Just our experience, we hitchhiked with probably at least 50 people, 50 different cars with one or more people inside of them, of all sorts of backgrounds, and some were dubious. Some cars were dirty. Some cars smelled like a pot factory, but 90% were clean, safe, and with very nice people. And we even had people who, this was in Germany. Germany is a great place to hitchhike. We even had people who, they heard our story and they said, hey, if I can help, this sounds pretty fun. Hey, do you want a burger? We can stop at McDonald's. Do you want some advice on the place that you're going? I can give you that. We even had a couple, an amazing couple in Berlin, who offered us that we could stay with them for a few days if we needed to. And we did need to, because our deal that we have, our Couchsurfing deal there, ended pretty fast, and we had to move out faster than we expected. So we called these people and they said, hey, come over. So those are the level of possibilities existing with hitchhiking. And the technique itself is extremely simple. You need a map. You can have a tablet with no data because GPS is free, so you just download the maps in advance, and there's a hitch wiki that you can check and you can learn some skills from there. But it's pretty simple. Basically, you need a sheet of papers. You write your destination on the sheet of paper. You find a place where it's legal to hitchhike, i.e. not highways, that would be suicidal, as well as illegal. And you wait. That's the whole thing. And this is pretty popular, or I guess it used to be pretty popular in Romania, and it's slowly fading, and it was made illegal as well. But yeah, that doesn't stop a lot of people. But this was very popular in the Western world as well in the 60s and the 70s, from what I understand. And now it's, people look at you with a little bit of, they're a little bit puzzled, and maybe it's harder than before. But you will have people who have done it in their youth. If you go out right now or in the next, 10 years, you will have people who have hitchhiked themselves in their youth, and they will be the ones who will pick you up most generally. And they'll be nice people. They will understand your situation, and it's a win-win. You make their journey a little bit less boring, and they give you a lift. It's a very nice thing. So you will not have to pay anything for your travel if you have the time. Like, hitchhiking is not very fast, nor is it very accurate. And in our 45-day trip, the only time after Hungary, after the trains in the beginning, the only time we had spent any money on transportation was our flight back. We were too weary to hitchhike back, and it was getting, as I said, winter was coming, so that wasn't such a great prospect to look forward to. So we bought a plane ticket, and also we could not hitchhike in time to the airport because we bought the ticket from Brussels and we were in Paris, and we thought we could hitchhike back to Brussels in time. We couldn't, so we got a bus. Also, northern France is a terrible place to hitchhike. It's doable, but you will not like it that much. If you know French, then it's good. But anyway, tips and tricks aside, other than that, we had spent nothing on travel. In fact, as I said, we've often benefited from it materially, with people giving us food, giving us shelter, and giving us great company and stories and advice. So if you're thinking about this, travel is practically free. You need a sheet of paper, a marker or more preferably, and a map. That's it. You're set. Next, housing. What we used for housing were, well, 4 variations happen, and 3 of the 4 are free. So our backbone, our main number 1 strategy was Couchsurfing. And I will not go into too much detail here about Couchsurfing, but it is a website. It is a website of people offering travelers their couches and also using it as a platform to find couches as well. And it's not necessarily a couch, but that's the idea, that's the brand. Hey, I have a couch, so if you want to crash here, you can do it. And again, it's a win-win because you're not using it as a hostel. That's not the idea. That's a rude thing to do. You interact with the people, you share a little bit of your culture, maybe you cook for them. So there is an interaction going on, and it's very beneficial for everybody involved. And it's a reputation-based thing, and I would say it's very, very safe. Very rare are the horror stories where something goes wrong. And you have an eBay kind of type reputation system where if 50 previous people who took residence at that place rated it at, 5 stars or were super enthusiastic, probably are not going to run into trouble as the 51st. And also, if you're considering getting into it as a host, you also have the same thing going for the travelers. So once you leave somebody's house, shortly after you both write a review for one another, and that is the system, and it's a very nice system, and it works very well in Western Europe. You have to be smart about it, and we ran into troubles when we weren't due to our inexperience. So there are places where it's very difficult to find accommodation, places and times, especially the combination of the two. And it's advisable, and this is not how we did it, it's advisable to find most of your accommodation before you set out on your journey, or have a lot of time between when you're supposed to arrive and where you're right now when you're trying to find a place, because we ran into 99% of our troubles with this because we were working on a very emergency type schedule, because we hadn't planned this whole thing out before. It was always up to 5 days in advance we were starting to look for places, and that's not how the system works, and we ran into trouble because of that. We had places where we couldn't find a couch, and this was the reason, because in very popular places the couches get booked earlier, and if you're doing this city to city, you can do it, but it's not going to work all of the time. And also, some cities are more popular than others. So, for instance, Amsterdam in the weekend, that's not going to happen. Very unlikely. And you have to consider, if there's a big event going on, it's good to research these things. Then again, demand will exceed supply. So, you got to plan for this. Now, the second way of finding accommodation was due to my friend, and he added a lot of value with this. He actually had some connection throughout the places, and sometimes that's how we found accommodation. He had a friend, he had an acquaintance. He's a pretty social guy, so he had some international friends as well. And that's a really cool way of traveling, because that's like a couch that's guaranteed to be good. And you can string these together. So if you have enough friends, or you're part of a group where people trust one another, that's an international group, you can string these places together, so you can very effectively travel from city to city based on where you know people, and you probably know more people than you think, so it's worth considering. And if you don't, try to find a place where you can make some international connections. It's I'll leave that up to you, but I'll tell you that it's pretty easy to find these places, and you can make some friends, and you don't have to be very close with someone to say, hey, by the way, if I come through X country in your city, can I stay a day or two with you, or 3 or 4 days, or whatever your plan is, and they will probably say yes. And of course, don't force yourself onto people, but it's a good system. And then, of course, you return the favor. So that's the second way. The third way is basically homelessness, and we had to do this from time to time, and it was a really interesting experience. And in a developed country, I would say this is pretty smooth. Like, it's not as comfortable as having a place to sleep, but there are so many options and there's so much information on the internet on how to do it that it's pretty easy. So some of the top candidates are airports. Airports are amazing. If you don't have an airport, you probably have a train station. Train stations are not amazing, but they can give you shelter occasionally. There are places where they're stricter. Your biggest threat basically are the security guards, so you have to be smart about it. But if you do your research in advance, you can learn very effectively on places to sleep. And when we found ourselves without somewhere to sleep, probably 90% of the time, we did find at least a roof over our head. A notable exception to that being Amsterdam and Brussels. But other than that, we could do it, and it's something to consider. You find a bench, you sleep on it. That's that. I got a phone stolen in Amsterdam, but I got it stolen because I was so tired that I sat down. I wanted to look something up. I sat down in the train station when they finally opened, because they're closed during the night. So they opened early morning. We went in. We had spent the whole night on benches in the wind outside. So I was smashed, and I sat down. I wanted to look something up, but I just fell asleep straight on the spot, and the phone fell out of my hand on the floor, and I didn't wake up. Somebody eventually picked it up and ran away with it, and then a little bit later somebody woke me up. Hey man, your phone got stolen, but I couldn't catch the person. But that was an extreme situation, and that's something you can avoid. I don't suggest taking very expensive equipment. I would go with things ready to lose. So don't take your best stuff on the road just because of this. But again, this was one event in 45 days, so that's pretty good. And also you can invest a very small amount of money in a tablet, and that's all you will need. You can take photos, you can do everything with that if you so desire. Oh, and also I just remembered another tip for hitchhiking: go to gas stations. That's the king of getting around, especially long distance. So side of the road, not as good as actually people who are filling their car, and you can go and talk to them and do a sales job. And don't be aggressive, but you have to pursue them. You have to pursue them, and you have to persuade them to have them get you into your car. But it's a good way of travel, and it is shelter as well. You get the wind, but you don't get the rain. So I've covered the housing, and and the fourth option is cheap hostels. We only got to this point. We only stooped so low because we were really broken around the end of our journey. We had a string of bad luck and no shelter, and that was kind of our limit. So we finally conceded, and we got a hostel room for I think something like $20 a night. So if you have a little bit more of a budget, or if you're in an emergency or you're really tired, you can always find very cheap kind of student/hitchhiker accommodation. It's not gonna break your budget. It's rooms with 8 to 10 people, but you get a locker, and you just need a place to sleep, basically. I always look at these offers on the internet, and they're so absurd. They're taking advantage of people's lack of skills. Like, why do you need a room? Why do you need a room to be alone in and pay 10 times the price and travel 25% of the time that you could travel without it? And if it's your 1 week break and you're earning a lot of money, you might not want to sleep with 10 people. But maybe you do, so that's something to consider. So if you want a less extreme version of this, hostels, youth hostels, or just hostels in general are the best way of doing it in Western Europe. They're pretty cheap. They're not gonna break your budget. They did break our budget, but that was a very special situation. And when it comes to food, I could give you some extreme stories, and we did do a little bit of the extreme where we would pick up people's leftovers in fast food restaurants and things like that. But I probably wouldn't do it now, because now I learned to spend less money on food, and you can find pretty cheap on-the-go edible food where it's under $2 a day. And for that, I recommend checking out valiantgrowth.com/E14, as in episode 14, in which I discuss how to have a really small food budget. And the same applies to traveling. You will have a harder time cooking, so you will have to orient yourself towards food that are more consumable on the go. But you can really be smart about that too, and not spend a lot. So there are certain items that are just winners in this situation. So value bread, for instance, can be a very cheap source of calories. And yeah, it's not the epitome of health, but you're traveling, so you can heal the abuse once you get back home. And things like cornflakes, you can pretty much eat cornflakes anywhere. They are very cheap, and I'll leave it to you. Just use the system that you can find in valiantgrowth.com/episode 14, and you'll be okay. You'll be spending less than $2 a day on food. And of course, if you want to indulge and enjoy the local cuisine, and the money that you saved elsewhere you want to invest it here, you can do it. But if you're really on a shoestring budget, or you don't want to spend much, you can just eat the same thing that you'd eat at home, minus the cookable things, and keep going. And occasionally we did our thing were beers. We tried beers everywhere, and it fit within the budget, especially if you buy them out of a supermarket as opposed to a pub. You'll get them for a fraction of the price, and you can argue on the quality, but you can kind of experience at least a little bit of the local cuisine, even from supermarkets. So beers are great. I recommend supermarket beers from Germany are unbelievable. If you're in the Netherlands, cheap cheese. You don't have to go overboard, like just regular Joe cheese in the supermarkets is stunning, and I don't know why it didn't spread. It's unbelievable. So that's food. And if you're on a shoestring budget, you're not going to be buying a lot of other stuff. So that's it. So that's my story with traveling Europe. And you might ask as a final question, so Philip, if you have built these skills, why are you not doing it? Why haven't you done it since 3 years ago when you were 20? And that's a good question. And the reason is that my life, I had other things to do, and I had more strategic goals to work on. And even right now, it's not really a possibility on this scale and as international travel for the next few years. But there will come a time when I will take the mantle again. And who knows, if I'm making a living from podcasting, I might not have to eat leftover French fries from McDonald's when I do it the second time. But yeah, if you can fit this into your life, I recommend it. It's full of benefits. I will say one thing that I forgot to mention is that it's also great for personal development. You might be surprised, but even with all the hitchhiking and all the being actively involved in survival, you're still probably gonna have more time than you do if you work a regular job. And for instance, I've read more books in these 45 days than in any other 45-day period. I've done more reflection than I've ever done before. We talked more with my friend than we ever did before. So it can be an important tool for personal development. And there are limitations here. So there are people who considered going from hostel to hostel, getting smashed every night as a form of personal enlightenment, and collecting STDs from around the world as the way to nirvana or something. I'm not recommending that, but there is value in travel. So yeah, I gave you the tools. If you have any cool stories after this, by God, if you do anything like this, even if you have done anything like this and there are more lessons that you've learned that I haven't learned and you can share, shoot me an email at valiantgrowth@gmail.com, because I will interview you. If you can give me a good story, I'd love to do it. And Valiant Growth can be about travel as well. It's an open book. Thank you for listening to Valiant Growth, and I dare you to flourish today. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. It helps me so much. And join the discussion at facebook.com/valiantgrowth. The best ways of listening to this podcast are on Android. There's an app in the Play Store. Google Google Valiant Growth, or search the Play Store for Valiant Growth. On iOS, currently the best way is iTunes, but I have the application submitted and in review in the App Store, so it would come out very shortly. Maybe if you search your App Store right now, you will see Valiant Growth. But if not, iTunes and the podcast app are the way to go. And there's also an app coming for Windows phones. Until then, there are podcast directory applications there as well. Just search for it. And again, if you have a cool story, a cool travel story, or even if you have a cool travel story inspired by this podcast, reach out to me at valiantgrowth@gmail.com.